And I want to kick the show off with Mark Ames. He's the co-host of Radio War Nerd Podcast. He's a contributor to Pando Daily. He's the author of Going Postal, Rage, Murder, and Rebellion from Reagan's Workplaces to Clinton's Columbine and Beyond. You can find a lot of his writings over at pando.com. You can tweet him at Mark Ames Exiled. And Mark, welcome back to the program.
Good to be back, Thom.
Great to have you with us. You, back in 2013, wrote kind of the definitive piece on the history of libertarianism in America. And I wanted, we talked about this on TV last night, I wanted to revisit it for our radio audience. The thing that astonishes me, I think that there's a number of people in their 40s and older, and certainly boomers, people in their 50s and older, who get that the Libertarian Party is, kind of a front group for billionaires and all that kind of thing. And some of them still support it anyway, because they're just like these, they still believe Milton Friedman kind of stuff, or Ayn Rand. Yeah. But then there's this huge cohort of young people, millennials in particular, who think they understand what the Libertarian Party is all about because, hey, let's, decriminalize prostitution and pot and being fiscally conservative seems like a reasonable thing. What's the history of the Libertarian Party? Where did it come from?
So it's essentially a business lobby front. It was exposed in the peak of the McCarthy era, or in the early McCarthy era in 1950. The Democrats, briefly, but led by a real powerful labor representative from Pennsylvania, Buchanan, had their own committee where they tried to start undermining McCarthyism. And what they did was they started exposing these lobby fronts. And what they found, to their utter shock, and these groups were tied in with McCarthy too, and what they found to their utter shock was that a brand new think tank established right at the beginning of the Cold War called the Foundation for Economic Education was what they said the best funded business think tank they'd ever seen. It was funded by, as they call it, the who's who of the Fortune 500. And, every major car manufacturer, oil company, Monsanto, the banks, everybody, petrochemicals companies. And if you ask libertarians, they all tell you, oh, yeah, well, libertarianism began with the Foundation for Economic Education. And you had all the early people were involved in there, whether it was Ludwig von Mises, Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman. In fact, Friedman was exposed in these hearings for doing illegal lobbying work for a national real estate board. Nobody knew who he was then, so his reputation wasn't tarnished. He didn't really have one. So it was known then, libertarianism, as a Cold War, far right wing business lobby front. That's it. And over time, especially one of Charles Koch's kind of genius bait and switches that he helped invent in the 60s and 70s was he tried to find ways to match up the interest of the billionaires and the corporations with the interest of young people who just want to be left alone, smoke weed, have sex, right? So the idea is, oh yeah, we just want to be left alone too, we billionaires. We don't want EPA regulations. We don't want taxes. We don't want the government coming down on us, just like you. So let's abolish all these things. And you can smoke all the pot you want, although you can't because they only want to abolish federal laws, that prohibit pot. They don't want to abolish state laws. Any state can, tyrannize you as badly as they want to. But their attitude is, here's the deal. You let us do anything we want, and we'll let you do all the pot you want and have all the sex you want. And when you're 18, maybe that sounds pretty good. But over time, you realize it's a recipe for actual fascism. That is the recipe for fascism, pure corporate billionaire control.
Yeah. And now they've got, so basically the Libertarian Party began as a front group for business, and it has just simply gotten more and more effective at that, to the point where, they've got their minions reciting this, less regulation, less government mantra, which is great for Koch Industries, but lousy if you happen to live next door to one of their refineries or paper plants. And they've got Gary Johnson and Bill Weld running for president. Bill Weld was the, I thought, a fairly reasonable former Republican governor of Massachusetts. Gary Johnson has a somewhat different past. You can tell us about that?
Yeah, and people are also telling me, I had that image of Weld too, but I realize I'm getting that from the media because some people have written me since then and said, well, you don't know what Weld was actually like. He was a hardcore privatizer and deregulator when he was governor.
He was just constrained by a Democratic legislature, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. But he wanted to do a lot more. So, but the head of the ticket, Gary Johnson, who headed the ticket in 2012, he was governor of New Mexico, which is the highest poverty rate in the country, from 1994 to 2002. He slipped in as a Republican because there was a split in the Democrats that year in 94, so he got lucky. He ran on a hardcore law and order, 3 strikes you're out, mandatory sentences platform. He was on the extreme right at that time, massively up the incarceration rate, big war on drugs. Now he's known as the pro-pot guy. So what he did then, and the reason he did it, is that his campaign was heavily funded by Wackenhut, which is now GEO, which is one of the largest private prison companies in the world. And he wound up turning New Mexico into a test lab, a deadly test lab, for the introduction of private prisons into the state. And between about a third and half of the inmates in a very short order went from public prisons to private prisons, from state prisons to private prisons. And immediately you had violence, you had riots, murders, people killed. It became so bad so quickly, and Johnson refused to have any hearings or any committees looking into it, that he wound up shipping out a huge portion of his state prison population to supermax prisons in Virginia, and was denounced by Human Rights Watch. I've never seen him say he regrets that. I've only seen him say he wishes he would not incarcerate people who smoke pot. He's very wishy-washy on other drugs, and again, he's not saying, because this would be a left platform that is against the war on drugs, it would make it, federal law that,
right.
You can't go to prison, let's say, for possession of drugs.
Right.
The libertarian version is the federal government should not oversee any of that, but any state can do what they want. So if Mississippi or the Rockefeller laws in New York want to lock you up for 25 years for smoking pot, that's fine. That's not tyranny. This, again, is a huge difference. Right.
We just have a little less than a minute left, Mark, unless you can stick around for a while and talk.
Sure.
You can stick around?
Sure.
Okay, cool. I want to get into how you learned about this. I want to get into some of the other pieces to the history of this. And by the way, I have 2 different Twitter addresses for you. Is it Mark AM or Mark Ames Exiled?
Oh, no. So, yeah, it's Mark Ames Exiled because of my Russia, Moscow newspaper that I ran until 2008 called The Exile. So it's Mark Ames and then EXILED.
ED, okay. And you're writing now for Pando?
Yeah, and we have a podcast, Radio Warner. You can check it out on Patreon. It's doing pretty well.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
That is great. So we're going to hit a break here in just a few seconds, right, Shane? Yeah, in fact, there it is. Sorry, we got hard breaks here on the show. I can't just fire them off. But we will be right back with Mark Ames. Mark, just hang on for just a minute. We'll be right back with you. We're talking about the creation of the Libertarian Party, and I also want with Mark to go through some of the policy positions of the Libertarian Party that are in the Libertarian Party's platform, what they're actually running.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Mark Ames with us talking about libertarianism. We'll be right back. And welcome back. 20 minutes past the hour. Mark Ames is still on the line with us, the co-host of Radio War Nerd Podcast, contributor to Pando Daily, the author of Going Postal, and Pando.com. Mark Ames, you can tweet him at Mark Ames, MarkAmes, Exiled, EXILED. And we're talking about the Libertarian Party. So Mark, you were saying that there's basically been a couple of I was talking about how back in 76 for a while there, I thought libertarianism was kind of cool in my 20s, and that that there have been several phases to the Libertarian Party. It started out as this pro-business, anti-communist, kind of the next iteration of the John Birch Society, maybe, or as a business front group. And then, if you want to recap that real quickly.
Right. So, yeah, it began as the Foundation for Economic Education, 1946. This is by their own history, by the way. But
right.
Again, the early people who founded this, I mean, one of the main early founders of libertarianism, along with Ayn Rand and Ludwig von Mises, who was a supporter of Italian fascism, was Merwin K. Hart. And people don't quite remember him as well today, but, you know, Robert Jackson, the Supreme Court Chief Justice and the chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, back in 1940 had called Merwin Hart America's leading fascist. And wow. He was Francisco Franco's lobbyist and hagiographer. He was a hardcore anti-New Dealer. These were the original libertarians. They were American fascists. They were pro-corporate fascists,
And the mission was to roll back the New Deal, basically.
Absolutely, roll back the New Deal and put labor back in its place.
So nowadays they've got you've got the Cato Institute putting out this stuff. You got Reason magazine. These are I think the Cato Institute started out as the Charles Koch Foundation, if my memory serves me correctly.
Yes.
And Charles Koch was one of the big guys in the Libertarian Party. Got his brother David to run for VP in 1980. So how is it that millennials don't realize that, for example, I mean, even in today's Libertarian Party platform, they kind of obscure it with flowery language, but they're basically calling for the end to all public schooling, period. I mean, in the 1980 platform, they came right out and said, state school, we advocate the complete separation of education and state. Government schools lead to the indoctrination of children and interfere with the free choice of individuals. Government ownership, operation, regulation, and subsidy of schools and colleges should be ended. So you've got people who are feeling badly that they're in student debt, and the libertarians want to say, hey, well, in fact, the current platform, well, no, this is we support the repeal of all taxes on the income or property of private schools, whether for-profit or non-profit. It's like we're going to support, in other words, completely privatized education. If you're not born rich, you can't even go to kindergarten, first grade, fifth grade, 10th grade, high school. It's forget college, right? How is it that this is? I don't think Anderson Cooper even brought this up in his Libertarian town hall meeting.
Yeah, I know that's another problem. I think people feel like, well, why go hard after the libertarians? They're not even in power, and it'd be nice to have them in the debate. Well, all it is bringing in another far right winger, far right neoliberal political force. So it's not. You shouldn't give them a free pass. What they stand for is returning this country to the 19th century, abolish civil rights laws. You remember Rand Paul let that slip. Ron Paul's always been for abolishing civil rights laws. All these guys are. I went and looked at the Libertarian Party platform after you told me about it last night, and you're right. It's more coy now than it used to be. A lot more coy. And let me tell you, among the many things I've written about with libertarians, and I've done a lot of research into them. I discovered, for example, Reason magazine put out a special Holocaust revisionist issue in 1976, full of Holocaust denial.
Well,
I mean, it's just these guys are, they are on the far right. But what they did then, they also put out a lot of stuff back then when there weren't too many people looking into them, saying like guides on how to basically con liberals, young liberals, how to con them, and where to find points of common interest, and then sort of woo them, that way. And particularly, look, their attitude again was. We, the corporations and the billionaires, want government off our backs. You, the 20-year-olds, want government off your backs because you want to be able to smoke weed and do whatever you want to do and not be hassled by the man. And you don't maybe want, somebody watching you on the internet or something. So let's make a deal. We all agree here the government is evil. So let's just abolish every federal oversight that we can possibly have. The thing is, they are for incarceration. They are for cops. They are for strong national defense. I mean, Gary Johnson, not only was he a hardcore right-wing law and order guy when he when he ran New Mexico. He just wanted all the prisoners and the prisons privatized. He also, even in the last 5 years, even since he came out as a libertarian, he has been against closing Guantanamo. He has been for military intervention in Uganda, of all places. He's come out for banning burqas. He's called himself very openly, he says, I am Sharia phobic, which is, not that anybody here would want Sharia, but to talk about that it's a signal that you're on the far right and you're going to be targeting Muslims, obviously, right? So that's the point. He's not saying, you should be phobic against all religious fundamentalism, I think, but you target that one, we know what that means. He's really just, as I've said before, he's trumped with a bong because he's allegedly pro-pot. But again, he's only pro-pot in the sense that states should have the right to
imprison you,
outlaw or not outlaw. And he's the same with abortion. With abortion, a woman should have the right to choose. But if you really scratch the surface, it should be a state-by-state thing.
So if you live in Texas, you don't have the right to choose.
Exactly, because it's tyranny to tell a state how to treat its women.
Amazing.
And it's freedom if a state tyrannizes its women.
Yeah.
That's freedom.
Mark, we're out of time, but Mark, I sure hope that you have the time to write a new article about the new reinvention of the Libertarian Party with their new platform, how deceptive it is, because you're brilliant.
Okay.
Mark Ames, pando.com.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you can tweet Mark over at Mark Ames Exiled, and we will have this clip up on YouTube as well. So, Mark, thank you again.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Good talking.